Hey guys, with another one-take review, and today I want to talk about the not-so-new Immolation album, Acts of God. Yeah, I know, this isn't a new album per se in the grand scheme of album releases, but I wrote about this record when I listened to it when it first came out a few months back now, and really I didn't have a reason to do a video on it. I don't know if it was because there are more notable albums coming out that same Friday, or if I'd just done too many metal-based videos that week and I didn't feel like adding another metal album to that pile, but either which way, never did a video on this one. There's not a ton coming out this week, this current Friday, that I am super, interested in listening to and doing a video on, so I figured why not just, throw some good old death metal into the mix. And Immolation, pretty beloved band as far as death metal goes. While they aren't as beloved as a band like, say, maybe Cannibal Corpse or even Deicide, there is still a level of massive respect that the death metal community has for Immolation, so when the band announced that they were going to be doing Acts of God, their first album in 5 years, I believe, since 2017's Atonement, there was definitely a level of hype surrounding it, because needless to say, it had been a hot minute since the band had dropped their last full-length LP. However, the 11th entry in their pretty vast discography sees the death metal legends back and better than they ever were before. Vocalist Ross Dolan has always been a personal favorite of mine as far as death metal vocalists go, as I feel like his deep, vicious, unrelenting growls kind of represent a more classic, meat and potatoes style death metal, which is something that I tend to connect with a bit more than the melodic death metal out there. And, generally speaking, I really can't get behind, in death metal, at least high-pitched or shrieking vocal styles, even if that is, respectably and understandably, a lot of people's main thing when it comes to death metal. I can't get into it personally, and Ross Dolan is the antithesis of that, as he represents sort of what appeals to me more as a listener. Ross Dolan hasn't really changed his vocal styles much in his tenure with the band, and songs like Shed the Light prove that he is capable of doing the same thing that he's always done, but still incredibly consistently. Instrumentally, however, Immolation's latest record is anything but meat and potatoes, and even though Ross Dolan's bass work doesn't really shine, as tends to happen on a lot of general metal albums, where the band truly shine, again, like most other metal albums, is within the guitar work. The dual guitar attack that's found on Acts of God is excellent and extremely well done, with a lot of the performance work here going well beyond the sort of over-the-top instrumentation style that tends to be associated with death metal. The solos on songs like An Act of God are surprisingly soulful, especially for a genre that's not necessarily known for its soul and sense of self-awareness, and the riffs on songs like Broken Prey are enough to knock the uninitiated out cold with their heaviness. Really, the biggest flaw that I personally find within Acts of God is the drum work, which falls to a very classic, not only death metal, but general extreme metal trope, which is that they're fast for the sake of being fast, and to remind the listener that they are, indeed, listening to a death metal album. Look, I get it. Everyone, including myself, is expecting a level of speed from a band like Immolation, or any death metal band for that matter, but there does get to be a point where those sort of just generally over-the-top blast beats and whatnot kind of tend to be, I don't know, just cliche, I would say. Sure, there are some songs here like A Moral Stain or Noose of Thorns that make that sort of very over-the-top extreme drumming work very well for them, but then you have a lot of other songs here that just simply kind of just feel over the top and feel very weighed down by this loveless and almost at times careless drumming style that seems to have no real passion put into it beyond wanting to take the skins as far as they can in terms of, basically just hitting them as hard as possible. Now, Acts of God is definitely not the worst offender of this as far as recent death metal albums go. I can think of a number of bands and particular records that have fallen to the over-the-top, consistently, unnecessarily fast-paced drumming worse than Immolation have here, but at the same time, it is pretty much the only aspect of Acts of God that holds it back from being a truly amazing example of not only modern death metal, but a death metal band kind of making maybe a bit of a comeback into excellence with a more recent album after a very legendary career. I will admit that Acts of God's a bit lengthy as far as death metal albums go. It's a little over 15 minutes, which really doesn't seem that bad at first, but really for death metal, that's about 10 or 15 minutes too much that is really needed. That being said, Immolation as a band actually do a very good job at making sure that each individual song on Acts of God has a sense of, well, individuality. They don't really blend together. For example, if you took a song like Derelict of Spirit and another song like When Halos Burn, I would actually be able to tell those two apart if you played them to me outside of the context of the album, which is something I can't say for a lot of other death metal albums, even if I do like a lot of death metal. And it's definitely something that, while I won't say totally warrants the runtime of Acts of God, makes it at least a less painful listen. In fact, it might actually be because of this factor that Acts of God is a totally painless listen. I digress, though. I could have cut off a solid 5 or so minutes of this record, and I still would have been pretty happy and would probably have about the same opinion of it. Overall, Acts of God is a great comeback of quality for what is easily one of the most consistent bands in all of death metal. And I'm not trying to say when I say comeback in quality that the band ever stopped being good. They haven't. I have honestly never heard anything by Immolation that has been less than very, very strong. But at the same time, I would say it's arguably been a minute since they've done something truly fantastic, and Acts of God is perhaps their comeback to that. It does have its flaws, but if you can get past some lengthiness and unwarranted lengthiness at that, over the top drumming, and maybe slightly sterile production, I really do think that Acts of God as an album is actually pretty fantastic overall. Acts of God is simply just another entry in a death metal discography that almost rarely fails to please, and because of that, I'm going to give it 4 stars out of 5. It's a great listen, and I do recommend it if you're a Immolation fan, if you're a death metal fan, or you're just a metal fan in general, and you just want to check it out. Again, might be an intimidating listen at first just based on the runtime, but it's worth it in my opinion. But then again, if you're not in the death metal, I wouldn't say bother with this one either, but if you are, check this one out. And with that being said, 4 stars out of 5. That's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.